Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ontario Cryptids. Today I have 4 encounters/events to share with you all. The first and second are part of the same story but different dates, so it's kind of a sequel to the first story. If you have an encounter story that you would like to share, then please forward your stories to OntarioCryptids@gmail.com. I would be honored to share your story with like-minded people. Now sit back and relax as we begin with today's episode. These next 2 encounter story takes place, one in 2020 and the other one in 2023. They both take place in Greenwood County in South Carolina on a lake called Greenwood. A few years back, I had an interesting experience at my in-laws' house. They live a good drive out into the country in a small lakefront community on Lake Greenwood in South Carolina. They had neighboring properties nearby, but most of these folks stayed there seasonally, and my in-laws were the only ones on the street who lived there full-time. It was late on a Sunday night, and my wife, fiancée at the time, was in the shower, and I was alone with our dogs in the living room. The back of the house faced a clearing in some relatively thick forested area that cannot be seen into from the house at night. However, at night with the blinds up and lights on, it is very easy to watch into the house from the woods at night. Generally, it's unnerving to look into the woods from the in-laws' house, but that unnerving feeling is usually solved by closing the blinds. On this particular evening, I was walking around the house while my wife was in the shower. It was very late at night, and it was just me and our dogs in the family room. I had just turned off the TV when the hairs on my body stood up, and I had chills. At that exact moment, our dogs ran to the window by the kitchen and barked incessantly at the window. I figured the in-laws must be getting back home after being at church. I got up and peeked out the window by the couch while the dog was going nuts barking out the window. No headlights or anything, but a massive thick fog was coming out of the woods and just kind of appeared randomly. I glanced over at the window my dog was still barking at, and it looked like somebody squatting in a frog squat was peering into the window at him. I got goosebumps again and chills as I started walking that way. I blinked and nothing was there at the porch, but the dog was still barking. When I finally got to the window, the fog was still apparent, but less thick, and I looked around in the yard and I did not see anything until my eyes made it to the woods. I couldn't make out a precise figure, but it looked like it was pale and had glowing eyes as it looked back at the house as I looked out into the yard. I closed every blind in the house and turned on every bit of light I could in the yard. The in-laws eventually made it home, and the fog was gone, but all night I heard scratching noises on the walls of the room we were sleeping in, almost like a cat trying to climb to a higher ground. Since then, I have never set foot in the woods surrounding the in-laws' house and always feel like something is watching me when I'm there. My wife and I recently paid a visit there for the first time in years and had a similar experience to the first time. We had been out all day hiking in the woods and just enjoying being in the fresh air and out of the concrete jungle of Florida that we live in. It was late, closing in on 1 a.m. We were on the country road just prior to the right turn onto their driveway. Most of the trip down the road was uneventful. Bugs were loud and could be heard through the windows, which were rolled up. The night sky was clear and littered with stars. The outside was rather well illuminated by moonlight as well. About 100 yards prior to the property, though, outside the car, we hear the bugs stop as fog rolls in. The stars all seem to fade and the moonlight gets dimmer. I'm blaming the fog. Instantly, after driving through the fog, I get chills, goosebumps, and the hair on my arms and back stand up. I briefly slowed the car, expecting something to jump out in front of us. My wife inquired about why I was stopping. I just told her something felt weird. I peered into the woods with my peripheral vision, too much of a wuss to look directly into it, but saw nothing. Again though, just like years before, I felt like I was being watched. The fog remained as we pulled up to the house. I told the wife to wait in the car as I hurried to the door of the house to unlock it. The fog had an odor to it, something I didn't get to experience the last time. It smelled like morning breath, the best description that most people could imagine, as if someone was breathing on me. Once the door was open, we went inside with no event. I let the dogs out into the fenced part of the property, away from the woods towards the lake. There was no fog coming off of the lake, definitely coming from the woods. They didn't seem too alert to anything, but were very reluctant to stay outside. Ben, who had experienced a spooky experience before, was not barking this time. He didn't leave within a few feet of me, though, not unusual behavior for home when we were inside or at our apartment in Florida. Outside at the lake house, though, he is usually far more adventurous. We go to bed to no significant events aside from the fog lingering. The next morning I wake up and I peeked outside. No fog, just beautiful sunshine and fresh air. I walked out with the dogs, who act normally once again. I don't immediately notice anything overtly perturbed or unusual. Our lab Penny, though, seems to have found something underneath the porch. A portion of their porch has enough clearance to squat under. I peeked under to examine what she has. She's allergic to everything, and the last thing I wanted to deal with was a sick dog while we were on vacation. There were 10 dead rabbits under that porch. It took a bit to get my dogs away from them and out from under the porch so the dogs wouldn't try to eat them. All of them were cold but not stiff and with matching bite marks on their backs. Almost like a dog bite, but lacking the accompanying signs of shaking that dogs tend to do when they grab something. Spooky. For this encounter, we're going to be heading to Sierra Madre Mountains in Oaxaca, Mexico. We're going to be going to a small town of San Pedro. My parents are from a small pueblo in the Sierra Madre Mountains in Oaxaca, Mexico. Over there, it is very rural and secluded and surrounded by bosque forests. To get a sense of what I'm talking about, Google San Pedro Yolash and you'll see what I mean. Growing up, my parents would always tell me stories of supernatural occurrences they or their parents would encounter. Over there, people accept this as fact and not fiction. It's not unusual to hear voices calling your name at odd hours of the night, hear dogs scrimmage outside and cry in fear, or hear weird tapping, knocking outside your door. The locals will warn their children of staying out at night for too long, venturing too far out into the wilderness, or visiting rivers alone. As a young boy, my father would accompany his dad to El Rancho, the ranch, which was far away from town. One day, as he was playing outside in the fields, he saw a tiny figure a few meters away from him. This figure had elven-like ears and looked like a small child. It was beckoning my dad to follow him. My dad had heard of these beings before. Parents warned their children of these beings, and so he ran to his dad. My grandfather immediately believed him and grabbed his rifle, asking my dad where he saw it. My dad pointed in the direction where he saw it, and my grandfather ran out and loaded his rifle, threatening the being not to come closer or harm my dad. After hearing very similar stories of these beings from relatives and my parents, I wholeheartedly believe that they are telling the truth. There's something out there, and I hope that one day we open our hearts and minds to learning more. This last one takes place in February of 2007. We're going to Miami County, Indiana, and the closest town is Peru. This story that I'm about to tell is not fiction. I kind of wish that it was, just so it would be easier to accept, but that isn't the case. My encounter happened in February of 2007. I used to work the third shift at a paper stock factory warehouse. The main day shift supervisor was on vacation, so our boss on night shift decided she wanted to leave early, so she let us sneak off about 2 hours earlier than our normal shift would end. So this would have been between 4:30 or 5 a.m. I was following a co-worker down this county road as the warehouse was on the outskirts of a small rural town. I noticed that he hit his brakes and proceeded to swerve off the road. I'm probably 1,000 feet behind him, and I'm thinking to myself, what the heck is this dude doing? And that's when I saw it. There was a tall, dark shape strolling down the middle of the road in a hunched over and swaying side to side sort of manner. I have likened it to how one of those tall windblower figures you see swaying at a car dealership or something like that moved. Very unnatural movements. I can't do it justice by describing it, as it would only really make sense if someone saw it themselves, I feel like. It looked like a tall person wrapped in a large dark blanket or cloak. I had to hit the brakes and swerve too, because I came to a full stop. Whatever it was, I couldn't make out any features or characteristics. I saw a large torso with 2 legs. The upper half was hunched forward as if it was leaning like an old person would with a walker. Now, at this time, I was driving a 1998 Ford Explorer, and I've looked up the height of the vehicle, and it's listed as around 67 inches. But whatever walked past my driver window was a good foot or more taller than that, leaning forward. So I believe whatever it was walking was over 7 feet tall minimum. Again, I could not see the head, any arms, just a figure with legs walking. My taillights illuminated it as I started to drive past it. I couldn't make out any definite details for the body. I didn't see fur, skin, or anything like clothing. It was solid, not like a translucent type of thing. It was just large, thick, and black, or at the very least, dark gray in color. My co-worker had pulled over into a parking lot a little ways down the road, and I followed him in, and you could tell that he was really scared. He was saying something along the lines of, "What was that? It didn't have a head." Among a lot of other things most panicked people say, we decided to drive back down and try to see if it was still there and what it actually is. I drove in the front and he was following behind. We come up to the general area and I noticed there's a large black animal lying in the middle of the road. It appeared to be a big black dog. Part of me knew this wasn't large enough to be what was walking in the road, but we had to stop because it was directly in the middle of the roadway. I decided to get out and walk up to it. All the while my co-worker is yelling at me to get back in my vehicle. As I approach whatever is lying in the road, it brings its head up and looks back at me. Its eyes are glowing yellow, which I write off as eye shine from the headlights, but it growls at me. So I stop dead in my tracks and just watch. This thing stands up on its back legs like a person, but falls back down. It sits back up and hobbles off to the side of the road like a wounded animal that wasn't able to use its front legs. It looked like your typical German Shepherd wolf-type face, but its fur was puffy like a chow dog's. It was a lot bigger than most dogs, but it's still nowhere near as tall as whatever was walking down the road. It was a lot bigger than most dogs, but still nowhere as tall as whatever was walking down the road. I didn't see any blood or wounds, so I can't say if it was actually hurt or not. My coworker got out of the car by this point after it had disappeared into the woodline. We discussed what the heck just happened, but while we were talking, I noticed next to our feet was a mouse. It was just standing there with us, but it was cleaning itself. I nudged it with my shoe, and it just kept cleaning its face as if it wasn't afraid of us. The mouse was sitting in an upright position, as it was on its hind legs and using its front paws to wipe itself. I never really considered it until recently that all three of these bizarre happenings were all on two legs. We got back into our vehicles and we drove off, and then the next time at work, I had mentioned what had happened and our co-workers laughed at us. So the other guy who saw it told me if I don't stop talking about it, he's just going to deny it, and I best just forget about it. So for essentially 15 years, I have never told anyone up until recently. I have tried to rationalize it into something that makes sense, but even then, it doesn't completely add up. I have tried to explain it away as it was just a large dog that must have gotten hit by another vehicle before my coworker and I got there. Maybe it was messing around with the mouse and it got hit, which broke its front legs, so that's why it was trying to use its back legs. The mouse was traumatized from the dog trying to mess with it, so it was just standing there cleaning the dog's slobber off of itself. That sounds at least plausible, until the original thing that we saw walking in the middle of the road without a head. The dog was nowhere as tall as that thing was, so even with the dog standing upright, it was close to 6 foot roughly. But whatever was walking in the middle of the road had to be over 7 feet tall, as it was so much taller than my Explorer, even with it hunched forward. I can explain away the dog and mouse, but I can't just explain away what that was. So I'm back at square one, trying to understand what it could have possibly been. As someone who's always been very skeptical, it becomes very hard to accept the unacceptable. I have always been interested in weird creatures and such, but I never truly believed they existed. I still struggle to believe that all these crazy stories could be true, and yet, who am I to say they aren't, especially with the weird crap that my former co-worker and I went through that night? All I know is what I saw. But whatever I saw is something I don't know and probably never will. It sounds crazy, and I personally would be hesitant to believe it if someone else told me that this happened to them, but this is what happened to me and my coworker. I hope you all enjoyed these encounter stories today. They all were very unusual, to say the least. The first and second encounter sounded like it could have been a crawler. The third one tells the legend of the Chinike, only it doesn't appear to be a legend. The last one is bewildering, to say the least. If these stories reminded you of an encounter that you may have had and would like to share, then please forward your stories to OntarioCryptids@gmail.com. I would be honored to share your story on this channel. Thank you for listening until the end. I truly appreciate it. Please hit the like button on your way out and smash the subscribe button if you're new to my channel. Have yourselves a great weekend, and I hope to see you all next week right here on Ontario Cryptids.